At Movie Nut here with a review for The Majestic, the 2001 drama starring Jim Carrey, Martin Landau, Brent Briscoe, Jeffrey D. Munn, Amanda Demeter, and Alan Garfield. Set in the 1950s, the story follows a young Hollywood screenwriter, Peter Appleton, who is blacklisted by the House of Anti-American Activities due to an event in his past where he attended a club linked with communism. With his career ruined, the riot divulges into drink and eventually ends up crashing off of a bridge. He eventually wakes up in a small town with no memory of his past and is mistaken for one of the local dead, a young soldier named Luke. As Peter tries to piece his life back together, the committee are still searching for him, and soon the two come to conflict and Peter must decide which life he wants. The acting all around is pretty strong, with Jim Carrey proving his chops as a dramatic actor here, and although there are moments where he does give in to some comedic nuances, it's never overwhelming, and for the most part he plays the role straight, and we really do feel invested in his character, which is testament to how good of an actor he is and how he can make material that, as we will talk about later, doesn't quite pull together, be at least bearable. Martin Landau, of course, is great as always as the father of Luke, who is an old-town projectionist and owner of the titular Majestic, a cinema in disrepair. And there are a lot of little sincere moments with him where you do legitimately feel that he cares about his quote-unquote son and how badly he needed this in his dying days. Laurie Holden does also very well as the love interest. And in fact, there were moments where I kept mistaking her for Gwyneth Paltrow. She does look so much like her. And she delivers a good performance, though there are occasionally a couple of moments where the character of the strong woman does seem to conflict with the puppy-eyed love interest aspect of her character. And the rest of the cast is filled with familiar faces who all deliver good jobs as the various people concerned with Peter's life, such as the locals of the town and the people on the hunt for him. And though they get mostly relegated to exposition, they're never boring or tedious to watch. The design must be commended. It truly recreates the 1950s and it looks absolutely beautiful, with the Majestic both in its disrepair and its repaired state being a thing of beauty and great design work. You can easily imagine it actually being a real theatre where the classics of the time, such as Singing in the Rain, would have been shown at. The clothing looks authentic, the cars look authentic, and it helps to really contribute to the tone and attitude of the film. And the score by Mark Isham doesn't disappoint much either, and appropriately recreates a score from a film of the 1950s. It's not grand or boisterous, and for the most part it does its work in the background, which is what good movie music should do. And there are a couple of classic 50s tunes thrown in there for good measure. Of course, the main thing to talk about, as always, is the script. Sadly, despite the accomplishments of the design team and of course the sure hand of Frank Darabont, the director of Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption, at the helm here, the script is what really lets the film down. Simply put, it starts in the wrong place. No, I'm not trying to say I know better than the actual people who made this movie. The thing about it is that we already know about Peter's past at the beginning of the film. In the first 10 minutes, we already meet Peter as the Hollywood screenwriter. And then when he suffers the accident, forgets who he is and is essentially more or less pushed into believing that he's Luke, the emotion that the film clearly wants us to feel in the middle of the film, with all these scenes concerning Luke and his father and his former love interest and all the townspeople who knew and loved Luke and can't believe that he seemingly has come back from the dead, just doesn't work because we already know he's not Luke. The emotion, the attachment, the investment isn't there, and the film keeps pushing and pushing so hard for us to feel. Thing is, those scenes should have been put in flashback later in the film when he starts remembering who he was, in order for us to really buy when people think he's Luke Trimble and to create a bit more mystery and ambiguity. Now, I have heard the argument that the film is meant to be a throwback to classic 50s dramas, especially the works of Frank Capra. But in a lot of Capra's works, the emotions were genuine because we were invested in the characters and because the House of Cards wasn't given away right away. It let time, it allowed for the story to develop. This just doesn't. And at nearly 2.5 hours, it just completely squanders its potential. And so much of the emotion is phoned in because of the revelations at the beginning that it just isn't as good as it ought to be, despite everything else, despite the production values, despite the director, despite the acting. It just doesn't come together. And even though one could argue that the film is trying to present Peter with a life challenge and try to get him to stand up for himself instead of always being pushed over, again, you could have had that, and it would have worked just as well with flashbacks. And so I must give The Majestic, regrettably, a bronze star. The production values and acting are great, and Darabont, as always, proves himself one of the great directors of our time. But the story just fails utterly. It starts in the wrong place, gives away too much information, and then expects us to feel for characters, even though we know the truth already. While I would still say it's worth checking out, as it was never what I would call boring or dull, frankly, you're better off sticking with Darabont's other works.